In today's shocking and hard-hitting video, we reveal the fact that battles, as it turns out, now hold yourselves, it's surprising I know, battles could be quite large. Now, obviously, we all know that. The fact that battles, yes, could be big. Multiple thousands of men across multiple mile-long fronts. That's not surprising, really, in any way. And this is especially, of course, the case in the long 18th and 19th centuries. You know, we've all seen those paintings of the massive battlefields. It's not really surprising that, yes, they were big. So what's the point of this video? Well, I think that while many of us have that understanding, you know, we have the logic, we're able to see it right here. Oh yeah, you know, battles are big. There's sort of a disconnect because we, in our daily lives, even soldiers nowadays, in modern warfare, how modern combat works, every one of us, by virtue of being born in the 20th and 21st centuries, we are so utterly removed from the reality of what warfare was like in this particular time period, it can be very difficult to truly gain an understanding of that scale and the implications of that scale for how warfare was fought back during the day. See, I had the opportunity a few weeks back to visit the town of Gettysburg and the battlefield there. And whenever you visit one of those old, you know, Napoleonic or Civil War battlefield sites, it gives you a real understanding that you can't get otherwise of the scale of these conflicts, just how massive these battlefields truly were. You know, if you're standing on one side of the battlefield at Gettysburg and you want to go to the other side, well, you have to get into a car and drive there. There's indeed a full auto tour route for people to go along, because when they were designing sort of like the visitor aspect of the battlefield, they realized no one's going to walk through this entire thing. It would take a full day at a very quick pace to just walk the entire thing, let alone actually spend any time anywhere. You know, it's multiple miles long. The field of Pickett's Charge alone, you know, that front was over a mile long. It would take, if you start in your car, you know, if you drive down the Confederate line when they're having that final charge, if you drive down that line in a modern-day vehicle at 60 miles an hour, like you might on a, you know, a bit of a slower highway, it would take you a full minute to drive past the entire line. And even then, it doesn't really get the idea across because it's difficult to imagine. But it gives you a sense just how large these battlefields were. And I think that it's worthwhile to spend a few minutes, God, hopefully only a few minutes, in this video talking about the implications thereof. You see, in video games, things like, you know, Napoleon or Empire, Total War and whatnot, the Total War series, if you have a force of cavalry, oh, well, first off, I should mention, actually, that oftentimes in games like that, where you do get a really large battle, you know, really big engagements, it's only going to be a couple thousand guys on both sides. Same thing with movies. Oftentimes, you know, if a movie is portraying a, you know, a battle in a very large, grandiose way or whatever, you know, those old, like, Waterloo classics and whatnot, even they are only ever to get a couple thousand extras and show only so many men on the camera. Like, oftentimes, even that's very flawed. But in video games particularly, you know, you're only able to get a couple thousand men. The largest battle that you can imagine in a Total War game is the size of, you know, a single corps or a couple of regiments, you know, in an actual engagement. But one of the biggest things about games like this is, well, first off, when you're overlooking the battlefield, you have a top-down perspective. You have a godlike perspective. You're able to see everything all around you. It doesn't matter if, you know, all of the enemy forces are behind a hill, because you can just look over and you can see, oh, look, that's where they all are. There are some modes, of course, that allow you to turn that off and be like, oh, if your general can't see them, then you can't see them on the screen, things like that. But even still, you're going to have a better view of the topography. And even during the battle, when everything is revealed, the fact that you have the top-down view changes things just so irreversibly, as opposed to the experience of an individual sitting in a tent somewhere, just receiving reports of what's happening in other parts of the field. But we'll get to that sort of thing a bit later on. Now, the point of what I want to say right now is, imagine if you have a large force of cavalry in one of those games, and you see, oh, look, the enemy artillery is exposed over that way. We can ride for those guns, we can take them out. You order all your cavalry to charge for the guns. But then all of a sudden, they reach, say, about halfway through the field, and you have them go to the gallop, because now that they're in range, they're going to really push, drive home, and defeat the enemy, take away their guns and whatnot, or prevent the enemy from taking away your guns. References for you. But then, all of a sudden, after you commit the men to a gallop, after they're charging across the field, then you realize, oh, wait a second now, look at that. The French are repositioning their infantry or what have you. They're in a better position than I thought they were initially. This isn't such a good idea. We're going to recall the cavalry. So you select the cavalry, move the mouse over, you double right-click, and the cavalry stops. All right, everyone, turn around, go back, and they all ride back to where they started. It's very neat, it's very pretty in the game. It works for those high-paced, quick-action strategies, and makes people think, oh, yes, I'm such a good commander because I'm able to win all these battles and whatnot. Everyone's thought that about themselves. Don't pretend you haven't. But it's so completely, again, removed from the experience of what that would actually look like. You see, let's imagine a very similar situation. You're on a battlefield. You're a general, and you see there, oh, look, say the Russians, they're carrying away our guns. We have to retrieve our guns. So you order your, let's just say, a light brigade of cavalry to make a charge for them, or perhaps, I don't know, the Scots Greys or something, if there's an opening in the enemy artillery line. You order your cavalry, you order a cavalry regiment to charge forward and try to win the day. Now, how do you dispatch that order, first off? Now, it's possible that they're in range for like bugle calls and whatnot, but even still, you have to get across a complicated order. So you dictate the order to someone, an orderly or what have you. They write down the order, scribble it aside. They hand it to someone in your staff. They take the order. They say, yes, sir, we'll get to it right away. They charge, they run, they gallop down the lines, and they pass the order off to the commander of that cavalry, the brigade or the regiment or the whatever you're dealing with. They pass off the order. The individual reads those orders, assuming that that individual is able to understand what you mean by the orders, assuming that it was written very well. It'll say, oh yes, proceed to the front, prevent the enemy from carrying away our guns, you're most humble and being da-da-da-da. All right then, come on boys, let's go. You form up the line and they begin to advance. Now, immediately, you don't have to have a runner run back to report, okay, General, they're doing it, the order is being taken care of, because, of course, the general, from assuming that they're on a high position of any sort, or assuming that they're able to actually see what's happening, which, again, we'll get to that later on, it's not always possible, they will see, all right, yes, our cavalry is advancing, first at a walk, then at a trot, and then finally, when they're at a particular range, they will begin at the gallop. Now say, after you issue that order, the cavalry is advancing, the general looks over and he realizes, oh, wait a second, I made a mistake. I was wrong. Something has happened. Something has changed on the battlefield. What a shocker. Things change very rapidly in a battlefield setting. And the decision is made, we need to recall that cavalry. Maybe they misinterpreted the order. Imagine that. Maybe maybe the situation's changed. For whatever reason, you have to bring those cavalrymen back, otherwise you're going to lose them. Okay, so, well, naturally, we'll write another order, hand it off to a runner, we'll have that runner gallop across the field as fast as he can to pass off that order. But there's a bit of a problem there. You see, if the fastest way that you can get the order from the general staff, say in the center of the line, to the cavalry, say a half a mile down the way there, the fastest way that you can get from point A to point B, well, you can't radio them. You can't telegraph them. You can't do anything like that. You have to pass off the order. They gallop across the way. The fastest way that rider is going to get there, yes, is by galloping across the field. And the quickest speed that a horse is going to be able to gallop, well, that's the speed that the cavalry is already moving. Once that cavalry dedicates to the charge, you literally cannot catch up to them unless you have a very particularly fast horse that can go twice the speed of the charging cavalry. Once the cavalry is committed to an action, it is committed to that action. You cannot recall them. You can perhaps have a bugler or some sort of musician ride up as quick as they possibly can and try to give a signal of some sort. Guys, come back, come back. You sound a recall of some sort. But these men, first off, they're in a battlefield. There's cannon, there's guns going off all around you. There's a simple little bugle call or a drum beat or what have you from some person on a horse way back, far behind the line, trying to get you guys to come back. Even if they, manage to hear it, they may not know it's for them. Odds are they're not gonna hear it at all because they're, charging for an enemy's guns. And if you cannot ride fast enough to hand off that order to say, hey guys, turn around. If you cannot reach them by sound, unless you have maybe some guy in the back with a set of flags, waving, say, like, no, come back, which, if you have a regiment charging forward for the guns, odds are the commander isn't going to be turning around like, no, I just have to make sure they're not going to change anything. Don't worry, have the lines pointed forward. I'm sure it'll be fine. You're not going to be able to recall them. The cavalry, when it is committed, is committed. You cannot stop them. It's a big decision. It's a big deal to order units to do things in the field, because once the order has been issued, it's largely irrevocable, especially with cavalry. With infantry, of course, you can send out riders to change orders and whatnot. But, when we do things like commit a unit to an engagement, commit a unit to battle, I say when we do things as if we're actually doing these things, but you get the idea. When a general commits a unit to do something, when Napoleon committed the Old Guard, that means something. If it starts to not work, if it starts to falter, there's very little that you can do about it. Imagine something similar with infantry. Say, yes, the Old Guard, they're pushing up against Wellington's forces, and they begin to falter, they begin to not do very well. Well, if you want to have those Old Guard pull back, you can't just select them on the field and then right-click and then they all immediately turn around and go back as they all get the order at the same exact time. No, you have to send out riders to each of those, battalions on the field, and they have to try and tell those commanders, like, hey, no, this isn't working, come back. First off, we're assuming that the order actually manages to get there, because, of course, when these men are riding across, a half mile, a mile, 2 miles even of field to deliver these orders, any number of things can happen to the rider to delay the order getting there, mean that it never gets there at all. Any number of things. We're talking about a battle here. Assuming that the order even gets there at all, the order has to be then dispersed among all the men. It has to be understood, has to be read. And then finally you can begin to have the infantry pull back. If, say indeed you have infantry advancing and you want them to pull back, they're engaging the enemy, they're in the thick of it, they can't see anything from all the smoke. Say 2 of the brigades, or 2 of the battalions rather, receives the order, guys, get back, pull back. But then the third messenger, maybe he was delayed for some reason because, his horse was shot out from underneath him. Maybe he's just killed and the order is lost. Any number of things can happen. Maybe the horse just trips and falls and he has to try and get back up and it delays him. 2 of them pull back, 1 of them stays put because they never received orders to the contrary. They're going to stay there until they rout and they lose all discipline. When you commit a unit to battle, it is a big decision. It is a permanent decision in many ways. And that's something that we really cannot get out of video games like this. Now, the other half of what I wanted to talk about when it comes to the scale of these battles is just that, sort of from the commander's perspective, just how big these things really are. If you are, say, at the Battle of Gettysburg is a really good example, actually, because I remember walking up an observation tower, which even then it gives you that bird's eye perspective on the battlefield, standing sort of on the right flank of the Confederate line where they pushed across the field in Pickett's charge. Standing on that tower, and actually I have footage of it here, standing on that tower, looking way across the way down to my right, you can barely see just through, across a very long distance, you can see where Little Round Top is, and you realize that Confederate forces were fighting all the way over there as well. You turned to the other side, and you look way across the way, and you can just see the top of the Union fishhook, where the Union line ended. And you can look across the trees, you can imagine, looking at this footage here, that from one man's perspective, say that Lee or what have you is standing in the center of the Confederate line, dead center of the force. He has to coordinate, as an individual man, all of the different generals, all the corps commanders, to commit to various very, very complicated, time-based actions, from his very limited perspective. He's giving orders to men, well, he's not giving direct orders, but he's ordering men, like, he's ordering his corps commanders, and like, I want you to, at this time, attack Little Round Top, and we'll have the men in the north at the same time attack from the other side, so we can maybe try and clump in on the Union lines that way. He can't see what's going on. You can hear it, but you are physically, literally, unless you have like a church tower, something you're climbing up into, which isn't going to be very common in a battlefield, I imagine, you are literally incapable of knowing what's going on the field around you. You know, we always have these pictures of generals standing on top of large hills so they can see the whole field. That's very ideal. That's a very ideal situation. You can't always pick your, your battlefield so well as that. If you don't have that elevated position, you have to rely not only on other people, doing what they're doing well, because again, because of how long it takes orders to be issued and everything, you can't be micromanaging forces on the extreme end of your flank. You have to rely on other people doing that. So here's hoping you have good people you can rely on. But if you're in the center of the line, you literally are unable to see. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the field. You, as the general, as the leader, as the field marshal, whatever you want to call it, they have to rely on runners coming to them to tell them what's going on. You have to rely on runners riding all the way, that mile long, that 2 miles, that half a mile, whatever it is, to report to you, okay, we broke through the line, or okay, the line faltered, or okay, this is happening, that's happening. We're requesting more reinforcements, we're requesting to fall back, all these different things. If you have men requesting reinforcements, by the time that request for reinforcements reaches you, and by the time you process, okay, yes, we'll give them the reinforcements. Then you have to send an order to the infantry or to whatever reinforcement, reserve group you want to go up. Then they have to move up. You can see quickly how extraordinarily complicated this gets, because the only means of communication are via riders and via, noise, music, sounds going back and forth. You are unable to see literally what's going on. That is the fog of war. It also really feeds into that fact that as an individual soldier, and this is actually something that you do get a little bit in reenactment, but as an individual soldier, even as an individual, commander, officer in the field, be you a captain, a major, a general commanding your portion of the battle, you have no clue what's going on with other aspects of the battle. You have to place complete faith and trust in the others around you, in your brother officers, to actually do their job as well, to make sure that, okay, well, sure, say the Union line holds at Little Round Top, swinging like a door, bayonet charge, hurrah, we're doing great down here, 100% perfect. But you don't know what's happening down on Cemetery Ridge, or is it Seminary? One of the two. You don't know what's happening further down the line. You don't know what's happening further north there. Maybe the fish hook fell. Maybe it collapsed completely and your entire army is doomed. You don't know about that until you receive the order to get out. And maybe even, that order that you have to get out of there, fall back over to this way, go back some way. You don't know why that order was received until you speak more personally with the people who were involved in having to issue it. You just know, right, we're moving again. And for the average foot soldier on the ground, very little information is going to be dispersed down through the ranks to them. It's a matter oftentimes of rumor, of hearsay, as far as like, why are we retreating? I don't know, I hear that Blucher got defeated, something like that, we're moving down. But the order is, move past this river, reposition in this town, fortify. Like so many pieces on a chessboard being moved around constantly, all being sort of masterminded by individuals who have a vague concept of the whole picture that's going on. These were big engagements, big battlefields, massive numbers of men and troops, all attempting to be coordinated from central locations. It's very, very difficult to do. This, I understand, was a very rambly sort of video, but it's been a while. I wanted to get something out for you all today while I'm working on other projects. I do hope all the same that despite, yes, it being over a fairly obvious fact that battles are big, that it still made some of us think in sort of a different way on the implications of the scale of those conflicts. Until the next time, my dear viewer, I am and I shall remain your most humble and obedient of servants.